Our series has taken us from St. Catherine's Monastery in the Sinai Desert to 16th century Wittenberg, from the glories of the imperial court in Constantinople to a far-flung monastery on Russia's northern coast, to China, to New Zealand, and to the trenches of the Western Front. We've also seen great beauty, from an icon displaying the triumph of orthodoxy to the magical and disturbing vision of Peter Bruegel the Elder in Mad Meg, and the technological splendour of Colenso's printing press. You may then be disappointed with our final object, which takes us to a town in western Poland called Swiebodzin, where, looming over the local motorway, is a 33-metre high statue of Christ as King. With his enormous crown, this Jesus claims to be higher than its more celebrated cousin in Rio de Janeiro, and yet somehow lacks his style. While Rio's Jesus looms over South America's party city, the Swiebodzin Jesus overlooks Tesco's. And yet this bold, stark representation doesn't just stick out across the physical landscape of Western Poland. It sticks out over the whole project of modern Europe. For, as we are constantly told, Europe has for a long time been shaking off its religious shackles and embracing a glorious post-Christian future as a multi-religious secular union of nations. Religion across Europe has become merely a rather eccentric private hobby. So perhaps as ugly as this statue is, it's nonetheless rather curious. How is it that it's our godless continent of Europe that has become the home to the world's tallest statue of Jesus of Nazareth? But of course Poland is a peculiar exception to the narrative of general religious privatization across Europe. For in Poland, the Catholic faith and the nation are inextricably tied. As John Paul II once said, without Christ it is impossible to understand the history of Poland. And yet Poland was not always so resolutely Catholic. In earlier centuries, Poland operated an impressive model of religious diversity, with large Jewish, Protestant and Orthodox populations coexisting with its Catholic majority. The Warsaw Confederation of 1573 legislated a code of religious tolerance that left Poland largely unravaged by the worst excesses of the Reformation. When Poland became the property of various neighbouring empires, however, both Protestant and Orthodox, Catholicism became a useful means for Poles to define themselves against their neighbours, as Western and not Eastern, not German, so not Protestant, not Russian, so not Orthodox. In the aftermath of the Second World War, as both Germans and Ukrainians were deported from within the borders of the new state, the nation became almost homogeneously Catholic. What's more, under the atheistic communist regime, it was the Catholic Church that maintained and nourished a Polish sense of nationhood behind the Iron Curtain. Perhaps one of the brightest moments in modern Catholic history must be the Church's contribution to the downfall of communism in 1989. The elevation of Cardinal Karol Wojtyła to the pontificate as John Paul II acted as one of the most important catalysts for political change. As a young Pole, the Pope had known the Nazi oppression of his country, and was obviously no supporter of a one-party state. But his pastoral visit to Poland in 1979, the summer after his election as Pope, was an extraordinary event, with some 13 million people coming out to greet him. His Mass in Victory Square in Warsaw was met with the chants of "We want God! We want God!" and his close association with the labour movement, Lech Walesa and Solidarity, was indisputably instrumental in the disintegration of the communist state during the 1980s. What Poland and this rather ugly statue points to is that, contrary to the secularist mantras, piety and progress have not always been opposed. Poland, despite not officially privileging the Catholic Church in its legislature, is nonetheless a nation that remains wholeheartedly committed to maintaining the place of Christian faith in public life. It's a nation that has known the disastrous effects of the alternative in its very recent history. The Swiebodzin Jesus is a reminder that religion cannot easily be dismissed from the continent's future, when in places such as Poland it's been so instrumental in promoting and safeguarding liberty in the past. And yet, for all that, the sad news is that the Swiebodzin Jesus is said to be in danger of toppling. Its foundations are weak, and some structural engineers believe it won't last even 20 years. Could the same be said for the Catholic Church's post-Soviet legacy in Poland? Some would say so, not least because so many young people in Poland hold views on social issues that are so sharply different from those of the Vatican. Like the Orthodox Church in Russia, the Catholic Church in Poland is seen by many young people as out of touch, out of date, and the guardian of a conservative approach to life that grates with their more liberal social values. Will Poland, like the rest of Europe, now steadily move into a state of religious indifference, where Christianity is only practiced vicariously by the few who still bother to be part of their local church? Possibly, but there are also signs, contrary to the more pessimistic forecasts for the churches, that by the end of this century, Europeans will actually be more religious than at the beginning. Eric Kaufmann, a professor of politics at Birkbeck College in London, has argued that demographic shifts will mean that Europe will, surprisingly, be in the throes of desecularization by the end of this century. Why? Because the more religious you are, the more likely you are to have many children. This is particularly true of Europe's immigrants, whether Catholic, Orthodox or Muslim, and there's strong evidence to suggest that by halfway through this century the tide of unbelief will begin to turn, as Europe's agnostic and atheistic populations simply begin to die out. Such data, of course, presumes perhaps a little too much, little too confident perhaps, that children will automatically adopt the faith of their parents. But a growing Muslim population, coupled with a perpetually high birth rate among Catholics and evangelical Christians, does suggest that Christianity's future in Europe is indeed perhaps less secular than you might initially presume. Without a doubt, faith will look substantially different as the national churches decline, and a jostling of increasingly zealous religious groups may also provoke Christianity's more aggressive instincts in the years to come. What is clear is that, even if the Swiebodzin Jesus does indeed collapse in the near future, the brash Catholic confidence etched into its stone is unlikely to crumble as spectacularly any time soon. Huge challenges remain for Europe, economically, politically and religiously, in the decades to come. The question will be whether Europe's churches will be able to cherish and remember their historic resources for peacemaking, dialogue and the defence of liberty, or whether instead we will see the continent relapse into another terrifying cycle of fear and violence in the name of the Prince of Peace.